It takes just one question to change everything. One matchstick to burn down a forest of carefully constructed lies. What happens when a system built on one set of rules for the public and another for the powerful is called out in front of the entire world? You're about to find out. If this story makes you think, makes you angry, or makes you feel seen, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment to join the conversation. The truth is coming. The air in room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building was stale, heavy with the drone of political theatre. It was the third hour of another hearing on immigration reform, and the proceedings had slowed to a crawl. Papers shuffled. Aides yawned into their lattes. Republicans spoke of law and order with practiced severity, while Democrats pushed for family protections with weary resolve. It was a dance as old as the Capitol building itself, and no one expected the rhythm to change, but Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas had not come to dance. She sat with a stillness that defied the room's lethargy, her gaze fixed, her posture sharp. While her colleagues slumped, she seemed to draw energy from the room's exhaustion, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She wore a blazer the color of a thundercloud, a silent warning of the storm she was about to unleash. The committee chair recognized her. Crockett adjusted the microphone, the slight metallic scrape cutting through the monotonous hum. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. She looked straight ahead, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made staffers look up from their phones. I appreciate the gentleman's points on the consistent application of our nation's laws, she began, her tone deceptively collaborative. It's a principle we should all uphold. So, as we discuss the deportation of undocumented spouses for breaking visa rules, she paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing every eye in the room to turn toward her. Then, with surgical precision, she dropped the bomb. Do we start with the First Lady? Silence. Not the polite, respectful silence of a hearing room, but a hard, suffocating vacuum. It was the kind of quiet that follows a car crash, thick, with disbelief and the dawning horror of what had just happened. 3 seats to her left, Representative Glenn Bradbury's mouth hung open, his face a perfect portrait of shock. On the Republican side of the aisle, a cough that sounded suspiciously like a choked laugh was quickly smothered. The C-SPAN closed captioning feed, lagging 5 seconds behind, finally caught up, broadcasting the words in stark white letters against a black bar, sealing them into history. Crockett didn't flinch. She took a slow, deliberate sip of water, her composure a stark contrast to the chaos she had just unleashed. In the back row, a freelance journalist named Lex Torres was already typing furiously, his fingers flying across his phone. He didn't quote her directly. He didn't have to. He just wrote, Crockett just threw a grenade in the room. #Deport your migrant wife. The chair, a flustered Paul Gentry, cleared his throat as if he'd swallowed gravel. Let's keep the discussion respectful, he stammered, his authority evaporating on the spot. But it was too late. The grenade had detonated. The sound had escaped the room, and a digital wildfire was already raging, promising to consume everything in its path. As Jasmine Crockett calmly reviewed her notes, the first alerts of a national political firestorm began to ping on every phone in the room. While the internet caught fire, the West Wing was still a fortress of calm. But less than an hour after Jasmine Crockett spoke, the first tremors of the earthquake reached the Oval Office, and the fortress walls began to crack. Inside the private dining room, Donald Trump stood behind a Louis XVI chair, gripping its gilded top so hard his knuckles were bone white. On the massive flat screen mounted to the wall, Jasmine Crockett's face was on a loop, her voice echoing in the silent room. Do we start with the First Lady? The closed captioning burned the words onto the screen, each one an indictment. Trump didn't yell. He didn't pace. He just stared, his face a mask of cold fury, as if the screen itself had spat at him. His chief of staff, Vic Moreno, a man whose permanent expression was one of pained exhaustion, took a cautious step forward. Sir, we're drafting a press response. Something quick, dismissing it as a partisan stunt, don't write anything, Trump snapped, his eyes never leaving the screen. The order was so sharp, so final, it hung in the air like smoke. This woman, he said, his voice dangerously low, just said my wife should be deported. She said that in front of the world. The room was packed with the highest level of his administration, Press Secretary Carla McNair, Communications Deputy Rudy Finch, and a handful of legal advisors whose job was to look perpetually worried. They exchanged nervous glances, a silent, frantic game of passing the buck. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Trump finally turned from the screen, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. Where the hell was Paul Gentry? He's the chair. He should have shut her down, gavelled her out of the room. Where is he? McNair, clutching her tablet like a shield, found her voice. He called for order, sir. We have the transcript. Order? Trump's voice rose, the cold fury finally melting into molten rage. He should have kicked her out, suspended her. They'd suspend a Republican for saying half of that. He paused, his mind racing. She said, First Lady, he growled, answering a question no one had dared to ask. She meant Melania. Everyone knows. It was Hope Daniels, his most trusted senior advisor, who dared to step into the line of fire. Sir, respectfully, if we push back too hard, we risk bringing more attention to Melania's immigration story. It's already trending. Trump turned on her, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean, trending? With trembling hands, she turned her phone toward him. At the top of the screen, in bold blue letters, was the #1 trend on X, #Deport your migrant wife. Beneath it were clips from old interviews, screenshots of articles from 2016 questioning Melania's visa history, and a torrent of comments slicing. Through years of carefully constructed PR, Trump's face twisted into a snarl. The mask was gone. The king was wounded, and he wanted blood. Find those people, he seethed. Every damn one of them. I want accounts suspended, reported, shut down. I don't care how. He slammed a hand down on the mahogany table, making water glasses jump. They want to come for my wife? We come for their seats. He pointed a finger at Marino. Get the paperwork. We're going to censure her. Make her feel it. We go big. Full court press. I want every surrogate on every show by morning, calling this a disgrace. The staff stood frozen, caught between the president's wrath and a political strategy they knew was suicidal. They were no longer trying to control a news story. They were being ordered to pour gasoline on a wildfire, and they knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that they were all about to get burned. The White House could command the news cycle, but it couldn't control the conversation. By sunrise, the story of Jasmine Crockett's question was no longer a political squabble contained within the Beltway. It had bled into the national bloodstream, carried by fiber optic cables and cellular signals, and it was becoming a painful, unavoidable national self-examination. Fox News led the charge, framing the incident as a petty, unprovoked assault. A disgusting, classless attack on a first lady who has brought nothing but grace to the White House, one host declared, his face a mask of indignation. But on CNN and MSNBC, the narrative was starkly different. They brought on former immigration attorneys who spoke with a quiet fury, men and women who had watched families be shattered over infractions far smaller than what Melania was being accused of. I've seen mothers deported for using the wrong social security number to get a job cleaning officers, one former ICE lawyer said, her voice heavy with the weight of years of forced injustice. We're talking about a double standard so profound it's painful for millions to even look at, but the story's true power wasn't in the talking heads. It was in the chorus of voices rising from the public. In Phoenix, Arizona, a mother of two named Maria filmed a TikTok from her cramped kitchen table, her face weary but her eyes defiant. Her husband had been deported in 2022 for overstaying his visa by 6 weeks after being laid off during the pandemic. I just want to know, she said, her voice cracking as she fought back tears, why my kids lost their father over a technicality, but Melania gets to stay first lady like none of it ever happened. That raw, 45-second clip hit 10 million views before the White House had even finished its first damage control meeting. On late-night television, the jokes were swift and brutal. So apparently, one host deadpanned, if you break immigration laws but marry a billionaire, it's patriotic. If you break them to feed your family, it's criminal. Makes total sense, the studio audience roared, but then he held up a hand, his expression turning serious. But this isn't a joke for everyone. Some people lost everything over this double standard. That line got clipped too, and shared over and over again. Amid the growing firestorm, Jasmine Crockett prepared to speak again. She'd chosen her venue carefully, a prime-time interview with Latrice Greer, a journalist known for her sharp, unflinching questions. When the red light blinked on, Greer wasted no time. "Congresswoman, you lit a match. Did you mean to suggest the First Lady of the United States should be deported?" Crockett didn't blink. "What I meant," she said, her voice even and clear, "is that we cannot keep enforcing immigration rules with cruelty on one group of people while pretending those same rules don't apply to the powerful." "I wasn't attacking a woman. I was exposing a system," Greer pressed. "But the personal nature of it. You knew who people would think of." "I did," Crockett replied. And that silence that fell over the room, that was the sound of truth landing. They didn't have a defense, they just didn't want the conversation to happen. She leaned forward, her eyes finding the camera. "My regret isn't what I said. My regret is for every family that was destroyed by a system that tells them the rules are absolute when we all know they're not." Then she delivered the line that would define the entire affair. "No one gets a free pass just because their husband lives in the White House." The words became an instant rallying cry for some and a declaration of war for others. The battle lines were no longer just political. They were personal, cutting through neighborhoods, families, and the very heart of the American identity. As the country debated, argued, and confessed, the one person at the center of the storm remained perfectly still. Melania Trump had gone quiet. Not just media quiet, but existentially quiet. Her press office issued no statements. Her social media accounts, usually curated with images of polished events and charitable work, fell dormant. A planned literacy event in Tampa was abruptly cancelled due to scheduling conflicts, and a hospital tour in New Hampshire was indefinitely postponed. She became a ghost in her own story. That silence was a strategic choice, conceived in the panicked late-night hours in the West Wing as the only viable defense. "Don't let her talk," Trump had ordered his team. "They don't deserve her voice. We'll speak for her." The plan was to frame her as the graceful, silent victim of a vicious political attack. Surrogates flooded the airwaves, their talking points polished to a high sheen. The First Lady is a private citizen, a mother and a wife, one senator argued on a morning show. She is not required to answer to the baseless smears of an angry congresswoman. Her dignity is her response, but the public wasn't buying it. In a world saturated with noise, Melania's silence wasn't interpreted as dignity. It was interpreted as indifference. It was the silence of someone who doesn't have to answer because the rules have never truly applied to them. It was the silence of privilege. In a sterile conference room at the Capitol Hill Club, the GOP's top strategists gathered for a meeting that wasn't on any official schedule. The mood was grim. "The dignity angle isn't working," said Kendra LeMay, a senior strategist, pointing to a screen filled with polling data. "We're seeing a 6-point dip with suburban women." They're not mad at Crockett's tone. They're asking why nobody ever explained Melania's story in the first place. An older congressman crossed his arms. "So we released the documents? Prove everything was above board?" The party's top lawyer shook his head slowly. "The documents are complicated, handled by her lawyers years ago. Releasing them now, under this microscope, invites a forensic analysis we can't control. A single misstep, a technicality, and it backfires hard." The room fell quiet. They were trapped. They couldn't defend her with facts because the facts were a minefield. They couldn't defend her with outrage because the public saw through it. All they had was her silence, and that silence was becoming more damaging than any accusation. It was an empty space where millions of Americans were projecting their own stories of injustice. That void was filled during a live CNN town hall on immigration in El Paso. An elderly woman stood up, her hands trembling as she held the microphone. "My grandson," she said, her voice thick with a Spanish accent, "was deported last year for a mistake on a form. He said nothing. He was scared. If I stay silent during my ICE hearing, will I be treated with dignity or will I be thrown on a plane?" The panel of experts had no answer. The silence that followed was devastating, echoing the one emanating from Trump Tower. It was becoming clear that Melania's choice not to speak was the loudest statement of all, a confirmation of the very double standard Jasmine Crockett had exposed. Her silence wasn't a shield. It was a mirror, and in it, the country was seeing a reflection it could no longer ignore. As it always does, the relentless churn of the 24-hour news cycle began to move on. A foreign crisis flared up, a domestic scandal erupted in another state, and the nation's attention, as the White House had gambled, began to wander. The hashtags faded from the trending topics. The cable news chyrons moved on to the next outrage. But something was different this time. The story hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone deeper, seeping from the headlines into the soil of the national consciousness. In a high school civics class in Denver, a teacher used Crockett's question as a debate prompt: what makes a rule fair? A junior named Jordan, who usually sat silently in the back, stood up. My aunt got deported for signing her name on the wrong line of one form, he said, his voice quiet but steady. She was terrified of making a mistake. This lady, nobody even cares what visa she had. No one laughed. The silence that followed was heavy with thought. Immigration law officers reported a spike in calls from families asking to reopen old cases, suddenly armed with a new powerful reference point. They're seeing their loved one's story through the lens of Melania's, one attorney in Chicago told a local paper. They're asking, my husband was a good man. He made one small mistake. Why was there no mercy for him? Whether she wanted to be or not, Melania Trump had become the new measuring stick for justice. The White House never released her full immigration history. The questions were never answered. The papers remained sealed. But in the end, that was the point. The absence of an answer became its own irrefutable truth. At a town hall in Detroit a month later, Jasmine Crockett addressed it one last time. I didn't say that to score points, she told the crowd. I said it because we have people in this country who live in constant fear of a knock at the door, of losing their families, of being told they don't belong. I am tired of watching the system make exceptions only for the powerful. The crowd didn't just cheer. They stood, a wave of quiet, solemn applause. The lesson was clearer than any press conference could have made it. Rules matter, but who? They apply to matters more. And silence, when you are protected by the highest echelons of power, is not grace. It is a choice, a loud, public choice that exposes the very system it's meant to protect. It left a permanent mark, a question that now hangs in the air. Every time a family faces separation, every time a life is upended by a bureaucratic error, people will remember this moment, this silence, and wonder, would the outcome be different if I had a different last name? And maybe that's what truth really is. Not a statement, not a soundbite, but a question that never fully leaves the room. If this story gave you something to think about, if it made you pause, question, or feel something real, don't let the conversation end here. The most important stories are the ones that challenge the systems we take for granted. Like this video, share it to keep the discussion going, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that ask the hard questions. What did you take away from this? Let us know in the comments below.